you for the invitation to speak. How many people from Oregon, well, no, let's do it the other way. How many people not from Oregon in the room? Okay, very few.
You can catch them
We'll catch them later. I do want to spend, excuse me, just a moment talking about the state's land use planning system because it goes directly to this issue of development and conservation. We have a system that is somewhat unique in the country. We also don't have a system that often exists elsewhere in the country. So most states do an environmental impact assessment or environmental impact process for development. We do not have such a process here. In 1973, we had a group of people in the legislature who said, let's do it a different way. Let's try to set the table so that every community is ready for development all the time. Great aspiration. We're not quite there yet, but that is the plan. The plan is that communities have economic development and housing lands sufficient for a 20-year time horizon. And it is the economic development side of that I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about. When communities have land that is available for jobs, and that land is serviced, so-called shovel-ready and ready to go, they are then ready for new employment opportunities in their communities. When they don't have that money, they're not. And so one of the critical asks, and I just want to spend a moment whining about what Rep. Helm just said. He told you that natural resource agencies are underfunded. 14 natural resources agencies collectively get about 1% of the general fund. And so one of the places that's underfunded is the grants to local governments that allow them to do the planning to get that industrial land. So I'm going to stop the sort of negative side there and spend just a couple of minutes talking about some success stories. We're going to start in the far eastern part of the state with Malheur County. A county that has changed dramatically. So I'm kind of an old-timer, third-generation Oregonian, but when I was at Boise State many, many, many years ago, my roommate was from Ontario, and he was from a community that was one of the richest in the state of Oregon because of incredible farmland and a very productive agriculture industry at the time. Their world has changed. The agriculture is still there, but there's a community called Boise, Idaho, about an hour away, and we know what happens to rural communities when larger metropolitan areas start to suck all of the energy toward the center. All of the commercial, educational, healthcare, everything else goes to the center. And so today, Malheur County is a very different place, or at least the cities of Nissa, Vail, and Ontario are a different place than they were a lot of years ago. I'm not going to tell you how many. So we spent a bunch of time 3 years ago working with the county to try to set aside some industrial land. We added a couple of hundred acres to each of the communities of Nissa and Vail, and nearly 500 acres to the community of Ontario. One of the projects that got done in this legislative session was a so-called transload facility. As many of you probably know, we don't do a lot of export out of the Port of Portland anymore. And so much of the agricultural production needs to go either up to Seattle, Tacoma, or a little bit of it down to San Francisco. Getting that produce, that product, to Seattle, Tacoma is way cheaper if you can do it with a train than with a truck. And so this transload facility will allow a hub to be developed on industrial land, probably south of Ontario, where the farmers can bring in their product, transfer it off of a truck onto a rail system, and get it to market cheaper than they have been in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. So that's one success. A second one kind of builds off of something else that Rep. Helm said, and that is we have forests that are growing to maturity pretty much across the state right now. And the ability to get wood out of those forests has been facilitated by an agreement that the Department of Forestry has worked out with the federal government, and that is that the state can actually do management on federal lands. It's a very big deal because it gets a lot of deferred management underway. But once we get that material out of the woods, we have to have, in many cases, rebuild the infrastructure to get it processed. We've been working with Lake County in south central Oregon to develop something called red rock fuels. It's biojet fuel, developed by an investment from the Department of Defense, but also some commercial airlines showing some interest. We had to make sure, again, that there was sufficient industrial land available. It is now there, and Red Rock is in the final stages, we hope, of getting their financing, and we hope to see them break ground very soon. The last one I'm going to talk about, because I think it's probably one of the most exciting developments that is going on around the state right now, is an industrial land expansion in the community of Caucus. We actually approved it, our commission approved it probably 5 years ago. And one of the big issues that we talk about a lot is the delaying effect of appeals. That expansion was in fact in the Court of Appeals for in excess of 2 years. But the area is now being developed, and it is the new home of the Oregon Manufacturing Innovation Center, a collaboration between Boeing and essentially the higher ed system in the state of Oregon. What I hope can happen is that we'll not just be working doing fine metallurgy, but also be able to develop some materials science expertise in the area of cross-laminated timber. There are 2 projects underway in the city of Portland right now that are using CLT materials to build what would have at one time been almost exclusively concrete. They're demonstration projects, but it may well be that the future market for CLT could be immense. And that means one more use for some of that wood coming out of our forests. So, actually, I'm just going to stop. That's enough.
Thank you, Director. Next up, we have Ed.